Happy New Year and welcome to the Fantasy Forecast with Grinberg and Bigz. He is Grinberg, I am Bigz. We are here to follow up on our last show, which was our 2024 most valuable players at the different positions in fantasy football. Today is the sister show to that, and it's the least valuable player. So what we're going to be going over is guys that absolutely hurt you. And so my focus in doing the research for this episode was guys that were counted on, specifically guys that were taken in early rounds, where you had an opportunity to maybe take a different value, maybe fade them like we told you to, etc. And if you didn't listen to us, they probably sunk your team. So most of you who are watching today are watching for one of two reasons. Either one, you had a bad year and you're looking to kind of create that edge for you next season, or you just love our pretty faces.
I think it's all of the above, and I think, well, maybe not the bad year. I think a lot of our viewers had pretty good years. They listened to us. We had some very good hits, but today's a show that we're going to talk about some guys we probably had in our lineups or on our teams that had a little bit more emphasis headed into the year, and they just didn't hit our expectations. And there's a couple of them here that I missed on, and I'm going to take ownership on it for sure, because that's what we do. We take accountability, and not every one of our hits are going to be knocking out of the park, right, Biggs?
I mean, I'm often wrong, but never in doubt. So let's go through. We'll do QBs, we'll do wide receivers, then we'll do running backs and tight ends, and then I have a couple of honorable mentions to throw in at the very end of the show, so you want to stick around for that. But I will start at the quarterback position, and this guy has received a lot of talk over the last few days based on his fantasy finish, and he finishes quarterback 19, and I'm talking, of course, about CJ Stroud. Now, CJ Stroud he had an average ADP in standard leagues at QB 5. And before the season, we told you to fade CJ Stroud. There was no reason to be spending quarterback 5 price on CJ Stroud when you can get any of a number of guys, including Justin Herbert and Baker Mayfield, ahead of CJ, or after CJ Stroud went off the board, that we're going to, by our estimation, finish with a higher fantasy result than he did. There's one telling stat that I've been kind of pumping on a couple shows over the last couple days, and that is, if you take CJ Stroud's 2024 season and Aiden O'Connell's career, they match up pretty closely. They're one apart in touchdowns thrown. Aiden O'Connell has thrown 2 fewer interceptions than CJ Stroud, and in 2023, that was CJ Stroud's claim to fame. He only threw 5 interceptions, and part of the beginning of his career, he didn't throw any. So he threw 5 towards the end of that season, but everybody was talking about how accurate he was and how he doesn't throw bad balls and stuff. Well, he had 12 interceptions in 2024. So that that's called regression to the mean. He kind of came back to earth a little bit. So if you actually spent QB 5 draft capital on CJ Stroud and he finished as QB 19 in fantasy, hopefully you had somebody else to kind of get CJ out of that lineup and throw in your Baker Mayfield or your later round guy, and pivot, because CJ Stroud didn't win you any championships, and we told you.
No, he did not. And so hopefully our viewers didn't have too much of him, because I don't think we veered them nearly towards him at all. So CJ Stroud was a huge disappointment this year, and Biggs called it. So I'm going to talk about a guy that I drafted in a couple spots that, I was a little bit more optimistic about his situation. And, in these super flex leagues, sometimes you got to go with a guy later on. And I went with Aaron Rodgers late in some of my leagues, and it ended up biting me. Other than a handful of games, despite his age, he came off his injury. I was confident that he would kind of bounce back given the weapons around him. And when, the Jets brought in Devontae Adams, expectations for me were even higher for Rodgers. Even at 40, he always was a safe play, in his 10 plus seasons, 4,000 plus yards, 30 plus touchdown seasons. I just thought he was able to, have even 80% of that production. It would still be great for fantasy football. And it just ended up being not great. And especially in that last game, championship week, he had a career low passing yards of 112 through 2 interceptions, got sacked 4 times, one of his worst quarterback ratings ever. So, just a dreadful way to end the season. It was just a roller coaster season for Aaron Rodgers. And, unfortunately, he was on a couple of my rosters that I couldn't use him. And he was supposed to be the man to elevate the Jets. But unfortunately, he was only elevating, the sack count this year. So Aaron Rodgers was an LVP for me.
Well, there are a couple of factors in the Aaron Rodgers abject failure for 2024. Number one is the fact that he was coming off completely missing the 2023 season with an Achilles injury. We have a similar situation in Kirk Cousins, and we expected a lot from him, and he didn't deliver either. But I think the factor that binds in that conversation is that both of them were coming off of season-ending injuries the year before. So maybe if that's the case, if you have a quarterback who's coming off of a season-ending injury, maybe give him an extra year before we start drafting him in redraft. A similar thing could be said, and this was pointed out by friend of the show, Joe Kuvatakis, over on the Undroppables. He is looking at, in his rookie drafts or in his dynasty startups, the performance of running backs who get hurt in training camp. They tend to take a couple of years to get back. So your Jonathan Brooks, your Marshawn Lloyd, they tend to have a struggle early on too. So maybe we start attributing more to injuries and just avoid people who were injured the year prior.
Yeah, that might be the best case, especially if they're aging guys that, may not recover like they used to. And especially when they're coming into newer offenses, even if it's a year removed from an injury, he still wasn't in that offense very long. So, yeah, I like that call, Biggs. Now, what are you thinking about the wide receiver position? Who do you have as an LVP for you?
Well, I have a guy who, similar to what we just got done talking about, suffered an injury in 2023, and a lot of people did not give him that extra year. He had an ADP of wide receiver 10 and finished with a 10 points per game production out of the wide receiver position as wide receiver 10. That's top 12. You're putting him in your wide receiver 1 spot in your fantasy lineup. And he finished as wide receiver 41. And this is a guy that I've never been in on. I never will be in on. I get into arguments with people all the time that love him, and his name is Deebo Samuel. Again, wide receiver 10 at ADP. So you were spending wide receiver 1 draft capital on him, and he gave you 10 points per game and finished as wide receiver 41, which is barely in your second flex spot. Deebo Samuel, if you owned him, he hurt you very, very badly.
He sure did. Yeah, no, and I know you're definitely off the Deebo train. You've always been off of him other than a few spike games here and there the last couple seasons. So, yeah, we were out on Deebo, in certain spots for sure. And, yeah, Biggs, good call on that one. And talk about a guy that we both were kind of high on headed into this season. And
super high.
Yeah, I was excited, really excited about Deontay Johnson's potential as a top fantasy wide receiver in a new environment with the Panthers. After being a consistent target hog in Pittsburgh, I saw Johnson's move to Carolina as an opportunity for him to take over as the undisputed wide receiver 1 with a promising 25% target share projected, and Bryce Young would likely be forced to throw to him often. I felt confident that Johnson could return his 17 fantasy points per game form from a few years yards back. However, what followed was far less inspiring season for the 28-year-old, and it's just been a reality check for my projections. Only 4 touchdowns this year. When he went to Baltimore, only managed to get 1 reception, career low 11 yards per catch, and 26% target share in Pittsburgh. He didn't even see close to that anywhere else. Plus, he got a 1-game suspension. So his journey was a roller coaster. Didn't seem like any team wanted him. Must be a cancer in the locker room. And he had some opportunities that just didn't pan out. And, he didn't really hurt me because, I got him pretty late because I thought, where I was getting him was a deal, but it definitely ended up being bad. And luckily in a lot of my squads, I was able to recover from it because it wasn't a huge draft capital guy that I was investing in, but definitely was an LVP because he definitely stung me.
Yeah, beginning of the season, I was super high on Deontay. I loved his situation. I loved Dave Canales. I loved the Bryce Young resurgence. Those were prospective things that were going to be happening in Carolina. And Deontay Johnson coming over as a target hog from Pittsburgh. Things looked up. And over on Player Profiler, I actually wrote a couple of articles preseason about it was basically player versus player, writer versus writer arguing for that player. And mine was Deontay Johnson versus Ladd McConkey, and I took the side of Ladd McConkey and presented a pretty good argument about why you should be drafting Ladd McConkey over Deontay Johnson, and that absolutely panned out. So that's kind of a feather in my cap, if you will, and I'm looking at maybe a Deontay Johnson at super great value next year. He's going to be somebody that I'm keeping my eye on. What I want to see from Deontay Johnson is I want to see him make a choice of where he winds up in 2025 so that he can be happy. Because basically, if he keeps getting traded around to situations that he doesn't necessarily want to be in, that's not going to be too great. He needs to go to a place that's going to treat him as a wide receiver 1 option and tell him, you're going to be our target leader. If he doesn't have that, his attitude might affect the locker room, and he might find himself getting shuffled around the league once more. So he's got another chance in 2025 to, have a nice little comeback, and people are going to be really, really low on him next year. So you're probably going to be able to get him in the late teens rounds in your drafts. And I say, hey, we'll make a show about it later on, at the end of the summer, but maybe take a shot because he does have some skills that are unique in the NFL as far as his separation rates, his ability to get open. So as long as he's happy, that might bring a resurgence.
Yeah, well, hopefully. I mean, he has the talent, great separator, one of the best in the league, charted by Matt Harmon. So we'll see what happens. I mean, his attitude needs to change, obviously, because none of these new coaches that he's been with seem to be getting along with him. So Mike Tomlin might have been, the secret to, Deontay Johnson's success here. But, let's hear from our sponsor.
Well, I was going to say, Mike, if the viewers wanted to get into the conversation and talk about these guys, talk about Deontay Johnson, or even share some of the least valuable players on their rosters that either kept them out of the playoffs or they avoided the bullet and they won despite having drafted them. Where would they go and find that place to get into those conversations with us?
We are here.
We are here. We are here. FantasySportsAdvice.com, offering the best fantasy sports social media platform. Why join endless Discord communities or the trolls of Reddit? Fantasy Sports Advice is a community designed to help you win with 24/7 support. Go to FantasySportsAdvice.com and become a pro member for unlimited access. Again, go to FantasySportsAdvice.com today.
Sorry about that. I thought I had a pretty good segue. And then you kind of stepped on it a little bit, but
sorry, Bigz.
That's okay. That's okay. That's that's just what happens when we're recording. We're recording live. We're not live streaming, but we're recording live. So sometimes things like that happen. Speaking of sometimes things like that happening, my least valuable player at the running back position. Now that was a great segue. Christian McCaffrey. Now I know that we have to kind of take into account the fact that he was injured, and that's kind of unfair to call somebody the least valuable player. But CMC has had an injury history. And some of us were definitely off of CMC, taking guys like Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson and other players that will be named later ahead of CMC, and letting everybody that took him as the RB1 take him. It's not like we're soothsayers. We can't see the future, but there were some indications that CMC was going to be was not going to return the value at RB1. And I to be frank, I don't think that if he had played the full season, he would have returned value as RB1, simply because of the performances of some of the other guys. But the fact is that he did get injured, and the fact is that he finished draft season as the RB1. You guys that owned CMC were drafting him as the first running back off the board, and that couldn't have helped you one bit. He missed almost the entire season. It was revealed that he has been diagnosed with Achilles tendonitis in both Achilles, which is degenerative and will not ever get better. It's basically like having arthritis. So he is on the way out, and it showed its ugly head in 2024. And hopefully you didn't waste that first spot drafting CMC as the RB1.
Yeah, there was quite a few landmines in the first round, and CMC seemed to have been the biggest one. And if you would have avoided him, you would have avoided a lot of hurt this year in your fantasy lineups. And a guy that if you would have had in your lineup this year, you know, you probably had high expectations for him. He had just finished a career 2023, racking up 1,400 yards, 12 touchdowns. The Jaguars had shown trust in him as their clear lead back, and with minimal competition for touches in the backfield, people thought that Etienne could build off of his success and become a fantasy superstar. His 267 carries from last season indicated he was set up for another heavy workload, and his dual threat ability in the passing game made him a solid bet to finish as a top running back once again. But unfortunately, things didn't go as planned for Travis Etienne in 2024, and he had been far more underwhelming than anticipated. 2.4 yards per carry in week 17. He had very lack of red zone usage all season long, inconsistent workload, ineffective in the passing game, and he was increased in a committee workload instead of maintaining that lead role. Etienne had found himself in a committee with Tank Bigsby, resulting in less work and fewer opportunities. Travis Etienne was supposed to be a fantasy workhorse, but instead he was sidelined by a backfield committee and inefficiency. Turns out volume alone doesn't always lead to success. So Travis Etienne was an LVP for me in 2024.
I don't know what it is, because this is something that I missed in my analysis entering the 2024 season. But there has been a downturn in Etienne's efficiency since towards the end of the 2023 season. I totally missed it. And I totally missed everything that the Jaguars had to offer. Now, Trevor Lawrence didn't have a terrible year. I was thinking about him as my least valuable player at the quarterback position, but when I dug into the numbers and started looking at his fantasy points scored per game, he was right there in the top 12, top 15 of quarterbacks. So while he was on the field, he was performing at a level that we should expect from Trevor Lawrence. The problem was the injury to Evan Ingram, which we didn't see coming. We thought that the Jaguars were going to be a well-oiled machine coming off a successful 2023 season with a fine quarterback in Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne doing his thing, revamping to a certain extent the wide receiver core, Evan Ingram being the target hog in that offense. If things had gone the way that they should have, then our Jaguars calls probably would have been correct, and the Jaguars wouldn't have been looked at this year as such a dumpster organization. But that's the human element in fantasy football. And one domino falls and the rest come down, and that's what happened with the Jaguars. They had an injury that they couldn't kind of bring themselves out of. That led to inefficiency because they were seeing stacked boxes. It wasn't until later on that Brian Thomas Jr. eventually completely emerged as a fully formed butterfly. And the person that took the most brunt of that was Travis Etienne. And I hung it out there. I called Travis Etienne a top 5 running back. I fully saw it coming. I had Bijan Robinson outside of the top 5 because he wasn't going to get the passing volume. I didn't think, and Etienne was going to repeat his 2023 season. But that's why we do this. That's why we play the game, and it just makes us better for next year. So Travis Etienne, you are our mutual least valuable player. And for all you guys that listened to us and took Etienne very, very high, let's do it again next year, and we'll come back with some better analysis and clean up some mistakes.
Better results from Etienne too.
Sure. I mean, he can't do worse. All right. So at the tight end position, my least valuable player is going to be Kyle Pitts. Fortunately, somebody that I didn't have a lot of, except in maybe a dynasty orphan that I took over that he was on. I didn't really draft him anywhere. I didn't really trade for him or anything like that. But he was drafted at tight end 7 as ADP going into the 2024 season. He managed to put up 8 points per game, which we did talk him up a little bit. We were kind of high on the Falcons offense coming into the season simply because they were moving on from Desmond Ridder and bringing Kirk Cousins in. I said Darnell Mooney could be sustainable as a top 24 wide receiver. Looks like he's going to finish right around 26, wide receiver 26 or 27. So I wasn't too far off on that. We had better hopes for Drake London. We had better hopes for Kyle Pitts. And it kind of worked out for Drake London. It worked out for Darnell Mooney. It didn't work out for Kirk Cousins or Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts finishes the year after being drafted at tight end 7 at tight end 14, averaging 8 points per game. You need more than that from your tight end position. And that just goes to show you why it's important to have a good streaming strategy in redraft at the tight end position. Because if you had not drafted Kyle Pitts at tight end 7 and waited till your last round to take a tight end that you could flex in every single week playing matchups, you would have averaged more than 8 points per game than just relying on Kyle Pitts and wish casting that he was going to get the 10, 12, 17 points that you need out of that position. So stream tight ends, you guys. Don't draft them. Unless you're going to get a Brock Bowers or, we even saw some early season struggles from Sam Laporta and Mark Andrews, who were drafted very highly. We saw a full season of mid-range tight end 5 performance from Travis Kelce. So he was solid, but not spectacular. There's really 2 guys out there, Brock Bowers and Trey McBride, that are going to get it done. And if you don't get one of those 2 guys, just wait until the final round, because then you're picking up Jonnu Smith, you're picking up Hunter Henry and his spike games, you're picking up Chigo Okonkwo and his late season finish. It's just not worth it to draft tight ends.
Yeah, like you said, if you're not getting one of the top 2 guys, that elite tier tight end that's going to produce, you're almost better off, because it's going to be hard for you to pick those spike games on when these guys are getting a hit. So, might as well go for the consistency of that streaming appeal. And I like that call, Biggs. And a guy that I was, and a lot of analysts were optimistic about his situation, the potential for a breakout as a top tight end for the Bills, envisioning him taking advantage of an offense that was set to lean more on him due to the loss of a key receiving option in Stephon Diggs. However, Dalton Kincaid's season failed to live up to expectations, leaving him with a clearer view of the gap between a potential and production. Here is why his 2024 fell flat. 7 targets in week 14 against the Lions. Despite that game was supposed to be an electrifying game, and it was, and he wasn't a focal point in that one. 3 games, just 3 games with over 10 PPR points out of 11 opportunities. Just 0 touchdowns in 5 of 7 games. Despite his consistent usage, Kincaid couldn't find the end zone in over half of the final stretch of the season, limiting his fantasy upside. I just thought that he was going to have a little bit more target share. I didn't have a huge amount of Dalton Kincaid because of, a lot of my strategies, either getting that top 2 tight end. So I got a lot of Trey McBride, and I had a lot of, these streaming options that Biggs had mentioned earlier in the show, where I was able to pick them up later on. So, I was able to avoid a lot of Dalton Kincaid, and I'm glad I did. But I had some optimism about him headed into the season, and luckily, Trey McBride was there to, mask, me drafting Kincaid in a lot of leagues.
Yeah, and it kind of shows you what narratives can do in the fantasy football space, where you see a resurgence coming from the Atlanta Falcons, and then you see a big drop off from the Buffalo Bills. Although, they lost Stephon Diggs and they lost another wide receiver, and so all of a sudden it's like Dalton Kincaid is going to get an uptick in targets, and we're going to see the potential that he flashed coming in as a rookie, and none of that materialized. People were down on Josh Allen, and he absolutely smashed. People were down on Khalil Shakir. He absolutely smashed. So the narratives can change very, very quickly based on what the group think is. And so again, I can't reiterate enough. Don't draft tight ends, you guys. Now it's time for the honorable mentions, and my honorable mentions are going to be at the kicker and defense and special teams positions. Now, these go hand in hand with tight end and redraft. My view is always stream those 3 positions: tight end, kicker, and defense special teams. And these are the reasons why. The Kyle Pitts at tight end 7, like I got done talking about. Now let's look at the kicker position. There was a kicker who was drafted at kicker 2. He was the second kicker off the board. Now, the first one was Justin Tucker, but he finished as kicker 10. This guy was taken as kicker 2, and he finished at kicker 25, and that's Harrison Butker. If you had wasted one of those picks in the 14th or 15th or 16th round to get a kicker, and you put your investment into Harrison Butker, he absolutely didn't pay off for you. The other one is defense special teams. Every draft I was in, somebody was taking San Francisco's defense and special teams with their first defense off the board. We're talking 3 or 4 rounds before the end of the draft. ADP 1, and they finished as defense 24. They didn't help anybody. They certainly hurt by wasting a pick that you could have grabbed a Jalen McMillan, you could have grabbed a Darnell Mooney, you could have grabbed a running back, you could have grabbed a number of people that would have helped get you into the playoff range, but you drafted a kicker, and you drafted a defense, and you drafted a tight end that all hurt you instead of waiting until your final 3 picks to grab whoever was left over. Don't do it, guys. Don't draft the first defense off the board. Don't draft the first kicker off the board. And unless you're getting Brock Bowers or Trey McBride at a wide receiver upside, don't draft the later tight ends either.
Love that advice, Biggs. Right in line with my strategy too. And oftentimes in redraft, I leave the draft without even drafting a kicker. Wait till, as long as you can place a waiver claim before, the season begins, you know what I mean? After training camp and all that stuff filters through, then you kind of scoop up the kicker and stream them all year long. So I love the advice there, buddy.
Most of what I try and do on this show is present ESPN standard format redraft, and in those drafts they force you to take all the positions, so you can't get out on Sleeper. You can get out of the draft, and most of you should be playing Sleeper anyway, but on Sleeper you can get out of the draft without taking certain positions. On ESPN they will not let you. They will cut off all the other positions that you haven't taken in the last 3 rounds and force you to pick a tight end, a kicker, and a defense. So wait until that happens. Exhaust all other options before you get to those final 3 rounds and grab those positions.
Awesome, man. So we are wrapping up the end of the season here. Our next 2 shows are going to be our hits and misses episodes. So look for that, middle of the week here drop in. Biggs and I'll probably record Monday night for those 2 shows and have them out early next week. So that'll be a fun, couple shows there, Biggs. If you listen today, you probably saw our MVP show hit. Now our LVP is going to hit the line. And what else we got going on here, buddy?
We're over on Player Profiler. We're over on Player Profiler News. Also, you can find that on Twitter at profiler_NFL. We're on the Undroppables. We're on Fantasy Football Plus. Those are available YouTube channels that you can go check out our content. And of course, FantasySportsAdvice.com, Fantasy Football Advice Network. Go download the app. It's a great community. It's great interaction with all the people who are creating content and just players that love fantasy football and want to interact all day long. It's a social media app that is essentially Twitter without the politics. It's got the links to everything that you need, so you don't have to separately go to YouTube. It's got your Discord discussions. It's got your DMing capabilities. You only need one app, and that's FantasySportsAdvice.com. You don't need all the other stuff. So go download that as soon as you can. And, and we'll be back with you next episode.
Absolutely. And from all of us on the Fantasy Forecast, like we say every week, what do we say?
We hope you win.
We hope we win, folks. Have a great week.
We are here. We are here. FantasySportsAdvice.com, offering the best fantasy sports social media platform. Why join endless Discord communities or the trolls of Reddit? Fantasy Sports Advice is a community designed to help you win with 24/7 support. Go to FantasySportsAdvice.com and become a